I think of a parishioner I had in the last parish I served in Whittier, California, just outside of Los Angeles. I'll change the parishioner's name and some details to protect her privacy. Greta was a woman with a sense of adventure. She had grown up in Eastern Europe, in one of the countries that used to be under the control of the Soviet Union. And as she grew up, she learned a lot about America from television. She would watch after school every day the various, what we would call reruns of American shows. And she was particularly taken with one particular show that she felt gave her great insight into the life of the average American, and also gave her a sense of wanting to move to America. That show was Baywatch. She thought it was fascinating, all these adventures being had on the beach, all of the pretty and handsome people that were involved. And so as she studied in school, she made sure she got excellent grades. And she applied for various international scholarships for college because she wanted to go to college where Baywatch was. So she looked on a map of the United States and found Los Angeles and compared that with the various scholarship offers she was getting and decided on Whittier College, a small liberal arts college in Whittier, and packed her bags and headed to America, sight unseen as to what she was getting into. Well, when she arrived, she found that maps are not always to scale. And so when she arrived in Whittier, she found we were not a beach community with Baywatch on our front step, but instead we were a good 10 miles away from the beach, inland. So it was hotter, it was drier, and it was a good hour drive to drive across Los Angeles to get to the beach, and even further to get to the Baywatch beach in Malibu. But Greta was someone who was going to make the best of things, and so when she could, she got to the beach. But the rest of the time, she applied herself to her studies, got good grades, and on Sundays particularly, she would walk around Whittier. Now, the campus for Whittier College was a block from the church I served, and another block beyond was the shopping street for Whittier, Greenleaf Boulevard. It was old-fashioned, small-town Main Street, even though it was in sight of the Los Angeles skyline. The storefronts still had real stores in them. They weren't boarded up or turned into something else. And so she would spend her Sundays window shopping, going up and down Greenleaf, looking at the different American goods, seeing how Americans lived, sort of doing some people watching, that sort of thing. And she did this for many months after she arrived in the fall. Weather was getting warmer, and she was beginning to feel a little bit homesick. She was there almost within sight of Baywatch, but not quite. The weather was getting warmer, but it was hard to get to the beach. And so she was starting to do her Sunday walks with a certain amount of longing and homesickness. And as she was walking one Sunday, she heard music. She hadn't heard that before on one of her walks. And as she walked along, it sounded kind of familiar. It sounded like something that was stirring her heart. But she ignored that, kept walking, did her window shopping. Week after week, this would happen. She'd hear this music and it would kind of stir her heart. And finally, one day, she stopped and hunted down the music. Well, what had happened was the weather had gotten warmer, and St. Matthias Episcopal Church, with no air conditioning, had opened its windows. And so the Sunday service was now flowing out the windows into the neighborhood just around the downtown area. And she was simply hearing that sort of leftover music from Sunday worship. Well, she discovered it was a church, and it reminded her of home. She was Eastern Orthodox in her upbringing. And so the following Sunday, she came to church. She came to the 10 o'clock service with the music and was there every week, virtually until she graduated. She sometimes wouldn't be there for finals. We understood that. But Greta really found that to be a place of home. And as I got to know her better, and I got to hear the Baywatch story and things like that, I asked, well, what music did you hear that reminded you of church back home? I was thinking it might have been one of the hymns from our hymnal. We borrow from all sorts of Christian traditions. And she couldn't quite name it. I was wondering, well, is it the way that this part of the service was chanted or something like that, trying to draw up everything I knew about Eastern Orthodox Christian worship? I said, no, it wasn't that. And finally, she simply said it was the way the music felt. That as she was walking down the street, it felt like, kind of like the love of God was flowing through the air. And it wasn't that the music was done perfectly. It wasn't that it was done all that outstanding. But it reminded her that she was loved by God. And so she sought out where that place was and walked in the door. And any of you who ever walked in the door of a church as a stranger knows that takes a lot of courage and a strong sense of adventure. But she did find the love of God there. She did find a sense of faith there, a sense of care. And that reminds me of this morning's first reading of the first Pentecost, when there were all these people speaking in various languages and people coming around from outside the building because they were hearing their languages spoken. The miracle there isn't so much that people were speaking in very distant languages. It's instead that they were speaking with the love of God. The miracle that drew people in was not simply hearing their own language spoken, but hearing words of power, hearing words of healing, hearing words of reconciliation with God and with neighbor. Their lives were being changed by hearing those words through a distant window, and so they came. And that's what Greta did. She heard music that cut across cultural boundaries, that cut across all that we might have been able to predict about what might draw a college student into a church, because she heard love coming down the street. She heard love coming through the air. She heard God being with her in a way that she hadn't felt since she had left home in Eastern Europe. That's available to all of us. That's something that we are called to offer. It's that basic Christian task of not worrying about cultural barriers, of not worrying about what is the exact right thing to say or to do to let someone know they are loved by God. It's simply being loving. It might be as simple as humming a tune, but it's more likely being how we are, making sure that we're doing our best to be patient and healing and generous in our attitude and our approaches to the people around us. And the other part is to remember is every one of us has access, is constantly being gifted with that same kind of miracle. Because every one of us at one point or another in our life is Greta walking down the street in a foreign land, feeling homesick, longing for a place to belong. And all of us are being constantly gifted by God by the sound of distant music, of holy sounds of God's love. That God reaches out to us each day, each moment, so that we may know and feel that we are beloved children of God. That's the miracle of Pentecost, not the special effects of linguistics, but rather God's love being shared all anew in ways that people didn't anticipate or expect. And that's what we are called to offer and to accept. To be Christians who accept the love of God when it comes in a foreign language, in a new way, in an unexpected form, and those who offer it, even when it might take a little bit of courage to cross some kind of divide between us and the people around us. It can be as simple as sharing music. It's as simple as sharing the gifts God has already given us, whatever they may be. Whatever it is we as an individual have been made to be by God, is ready to be used by God to love another. And so each day, as a Christian, we live out the Pentecost miracle of being people who are loved by God and who love others, who welcome the Gretas of the world and realize that we are Gretas as well. At times we are the stranger, at times we welcome the stranger. Within a moment, those roles can shift. But all of that is based on the music, on the language, on the presence of God loving us and loving the whole wide world. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen.